the US military is such a beast that
Yes.
no one person really ever completely revolutionizes or
Yeah.
changes. They might come in and say they will. You might see some commanding general, even at the division level, comes in, 1st Infantry Division, 25th Infantry Division, say, "Oh, I'm going to make these sweeping changes." And they might, but the fact of the matter is, much of the requirements to execute full revolutionary changes take years and years, and they just don't have that kind of time. And
Yeah.
what I think Hegseth's going to find out is that, one, he's got a steep learning curve because he just has never really done it before. He's never been anything that this level. He was a major, which is like the rank I am. That's like me being suddenly,
You're a major?
yeah. So,
Thank you for your service. You know what? You should really give us an intro. That should have been the
well,
first question I asked, aside from like stupid social media stuff. Guys, and I want you to continue with the Hegseth thing. Yeah, please listen to Chad Squat's column. Chad Squat. I call him Chad Squat. Like, all of a sudden you're just like squatting 450, like, "Bruh." Anyway, Chad Scott. Let's hear your credentials, sir.
it's, I'm never a big fan of doing these types of things where I'm like,
Brag, 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 brag.
so I'm still technically in the military. I'm in the reserves, but I'm a major. I've reached the rank of major. I joined the military back in 2008, January 2008, active duty. I was on active duty for about almost 11 years. Then I transitioned to the reserves, which is where I'm at now. I was U.S. Army. While I was there, I commissioned through officer candidate school. I deployed to my branch, was originally quartermaster. When you're a quartermaster, once you become a captain, they send you to captain's career course and become a logistics officer. So I became logistics. So I focused on generally broad scale strategic logistics because my first duty station, I went to Hawaii at Schofield Barracks. And after doing the normal thing we always do, which is deploying somewhere, which I went to Iraq, I started working strategic logistics for
Where? Wait, what year were you deployed to Iraq?
I was in 2010 to 2011. So
Okay.
I transitioned from Operation Iraqi Freedom to Operation New Dawn. And I ran gun trucks. I was a gun truck platoon leader. So I was outside the wire, I don't know, every 2 days or so. It was like day on, day off. And I ran in the Sunni Triangle I was in Bakuba, which I wish I had a map or something. I was in Bakuba, which is, if anyone who's watching the military, it's about 30 minutes kind of northeast of Balad, which is where the big Bob was. And I would run gun truck convoys all the way across the Sunni Triangle up to the Iranian border, all the way up to the Iranian border. We would drive up and we could wave to the Iranian and drop off supplies to checkpoints and stuff. I did that. That was interesting. It was like the Wild West out there. I got a combat action badge. I would have actually gotten quite a few combat action badges out there, but you only get one. I got a combat action badge out there for different firefights and things involved. And then after I came back, I spent about 2 months in Hawaii. And then there's the crisis and the transition between Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-un because the father was obviously passing away. And they were worried about a refugee crisis. So they sent me to be the rail expert in South Korea. And I actually got to go to North Korea.
A refugee. Wait, so they thought people were going to flee North Korea?
If they thought there was going to be a massive refugee crisis, someone's just saying in the case, sorry, I'm in Kansas City. Man. I can tell that story too. There's a reason. It's not like I'm like a Kelsey.
Let's talk about your career first, then let's go.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm doing comments.
I know, I saw it. I wanted to address it, but I'm like, just wait.
No, it's all good. Anyway, so I went to North Korea, South Korea, and then we crossed over. And so in North Korea, at the DMZ, they have these little rooms where you work together. The North and South Koreans work together. And so the buildings cross the border. So we went in and we did planning because there was a massive concern that there was going to be a huge refugee crisis when the transition happened, the leadership transition. They didn't know if it was going to be clean, if it was going to be okay. And so China, at the time, our relations were a little better with China, said, hey, no one does logistics better than the United States. Let's bring them in, see if they'll participate. And so the U.S. was like, yeah, sure, we'll come in under the banner of the UN. And I went there and I helped plan rail, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on which side you're on.
Yeah.
There was no refugee crisis. It was a relatively peaceful, uneventful transition of power. And now we deal with yet another Kim Jong that is crappy. So
Did you learn were there any assumptions you had before going into North Korea that were either proven or disproven? Or did you see anything where you're like, holy crap, this is pretty amazing?
to be quite honest, I actually became quite angry with North Korea. So when I was there, we learned historically that there's this, it's like the Friendship Bridge. I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but there was this thing called the Friendship Bridge during the Bush Junior administration, W. Bush. There was talks to rebuild the relationship between South and North Korea. Interestingly, South Korean workers will work in North Korea on like temporary visas and they can come back and forth. So what ends up happening is under that umbrella of friendship, they decided maybe we could enhance relations. And North Korea, this was early in Kim Jong-un's.
Okay.
So he wasn't as despotic as he became. There was he was a lot more friendly at that time. He wasn't as full of his own self and stuff. Anyway, so the United States provided funding along with South Korea to build up infrastructure, build up a carnival right on the border, a bridge that was a rail bridge, a road bridge.
Awesome.
And it was going to be this big thing. And these families were going to reunite and any children involved were playing the carnival. And the day it was supposed to happen, the North Koreans canceled it. And a few weeks later, the North Koreans blew up the bridge. They blew the bridge up and that was all that came of it. Spent millions of dollars trying to build up this system. And then they just tanked it for no other reason other than Kim Jong-un felt it wasn't worth doing. So that was my kind of experience in that realm. And that really soured me. Most of it made me chuckle like this. So one funny story is South Korea, they both had these huge flags on each side of the border. And it's like they're super tall. A storm came through and one day South Korea's flag got knocked over. It was just old and fell over and South Korea just rebuilt their flag. But because they wanted to avoid potential problems in the future, they built it bigger and stronger so that it was.
Oh yeah.
North Korea couldn't have that. So they tore down their flagpole, rebuilt it, and made sure theirs was bigger and taller. And it's just stuff like that. It just made me chuckle about how, no, there's some serious implications there. Obviously, soldiers cross over or people flee under gunfire. And there's teams in South Korea that will crawl along the DMZ to recover people that have made it, but are like paralyzed with fear because they're being shot at. So there's really terrible things like that. But a lot of it was just a lot of brinksmanship and frankly, silliness. That's just.
It sounds petty.
Yeah, it's really what it
Sounds
is.
like what happens when a country gives absolute rule to just one person. All that power. There's none of the greatest religious figures on earth would be incorruptible. You know, and I'd be used to that kind of power. I'm sure, like when when any of the Orms were like kids, maybe they weren't so bad. They were like, oh, hey, okay, maybe we'll do this. But then they realized you're not doing what I want, and I have the power to make you do what I want. And we think it just destroys a lot of psyches. You need to.
Their ego is destroying lives. It's sad.
Yeah.
That's what ends up happening. And you can stand at the border and turn on a radio and turn it to one station and you'll hear South Korean propaganda piped over. And then you go to the other and you turn on the station to another and you can hear North Korean propaganda piped over. So they're just crossing each other
Of course.
and stuff. And yeah, it's really sad. Obviously, I'm very much biased on the South Korea side because I worked with them. I worked with the Rock Marines and all of them and did all kinds of stuff. Actually, this picture right here has a fence. I don't know if you can see it because of the.
Yeah. 38 parallel, right?
Yeah, it's a piece of the. Actually, here, I'll do you solid. It's a piece of the
Nice.
barbed wire from
Whoa.
DMZ.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So I have all kinds of little cool trinkets from all over the world because that was one place I was in.
So what year was that again? What year did you finish your tour in Korea?
I was only in Korea for about a month. So
What
they
year?
sent me, it was in whatever year he died, Kim Jong-il. It was 2012. Yeah, 2012.
Okay. What
Yeah,
about after
so-
Korea?
With that?
What about after Korea? Because I
No,
know at
that's-
some point you were a NATO advisor.
Yeah. So after Korea, I went to after Korea, Hawaii, same thing. I went to Captain.
Sounds real rough. Going to Hawaii.
Yeah, I loved it. I enjoyed it. After a while, though, you get what's called island fever and you get bored, but I would love to go back again. My son was born there, so that's like a flex. He has some like Hawaiian kids.
Yeah.
Anyway, so after that, I went to career course in Virginia, which is just training to be a strategic logistics officer. Then I went to the 1st Infantry Division in Kansas, where I was a company commander of a transportation company, a heavy truck company that moved tanks around. That was really uneventful. The only kind of thing that was supposed to happen was, I don't know if you guys remember back in that time frame, like 2013, 14, we were really having problems in Africa with Ebola.
Oh, yes.
So my company got not activated, but got orders to deploy to Liberia we were going to go there.
Liberia. Okay. Yeah. I remember some of those stories.
Yeah. And we were going to go. So we were getting stood up to go to Liberia. We were actually getting pretty cool training in decontamination. We got some pretty interesting experimental shots that one day I'm like, I hope I don't get cancer from this. But nothing that I've seen yet, but all kinds of cool decontamination. We got we did less than lethal training. So we did training. So we were going to go and move supplies for Liberia because their just logistics system couldn't handle it. So we were going to go help them. And what was interesting is we weren't taking our weapons because it's a humanitarian mission. We need our weapons, but we still had to be prepared to defend as best we could our supplies that we were providing. So they would give us like pepper ball guns, tasers and stuff. So we got training on that. So I got tased. That was fun.
Whistle. No.
Yeah, no. I mean, like, there was like we had special radios that we could call the actual Liberian military and police to come in and do stuff. Anyway, so we were going to do that, but thankfully that mission got turned off before we deployed because Ebola petered out faster than anyone expected. So that was a good thing. So we ended up doing
great.
That. And so after that is when I went to Germany, and that's when I started my NATO world, where I got my NATO security clearance and all of the stuff where I started working with them. And I started working as an observer coach trainer, which is basically I was on a team called the Vampires. We were part of the Joint Multinational Readiness Center, which trains not only Americans, but multiple countries. Like every exercise we did was probably between 10 to 18, 20 countries. And the goal was to bring NATO, and not just NATO, but our NATO allies and our kind of non-NATO partners together. Sure. And so, for instance, we had Armenia there, which Armenia was a part at the time was a
CSTO.
Yeah, CSTOs, but they would still come. They would be very limited. It wasn't any kind of like high-end training. A lot of times they were observers. And in fact, at one point early on, there were some Russians that came and were just chatting about training and stuff. And this was weeks before Crimea, 2014 Crimea. Anyway, so was an observer coach trainer on an artillery team. At the time, we were training Ukrainians too. And so Ukrainians came and trained with us, and we did a bunch of stuff with them over the years. Crimea happened to be continued training because I was there through that transition. Yeah. And actually, it was that Crimea invasion by Russia that triggered the change in tactics. And we went from counterinsurgency operations, or COIN, to what's called near peer fighting in a combined arms aspect, where it was not that we were all working together. America potentially would take the lead, and then we would work with Italian artillery and Ukrainian and German tanks, Polish infantry. It was really cool. And so we would do this training. I did that for about a year and a half. And then I transitioned to the exercise logistics planner, which was a very cool job because it opened up the world of the strategic leadership level of NATO. So I was able to transition into I would go to Germany, Latvia, Poland, Romania, all these countries, and I would help them stand up training. And I would brief for ministers of defense. I would brief generals, and I would go and sit in on NATO exercise planning meetings and planning sessions. And I would just fly all over Europe, and it was so cool. And yeah, so that's where my NATO world came from. That's actually where a lot of these patches and coins came from.
I want to bring something up because you gave a post 2 years ago, and I still remember this. It was about, you spoke with someone from Russia in the military, or he may have been retired.
Yeah.
He told you, he was like, we know we would lose. That's what he said. We know we would lose, but it's not about winning or losing. It's just, what was it? It was almost about being able to do enough damage to not try to even start anything. Then 2 more things I want to bring up, because it was just, these are very crucial. And I wanted to ask you this for those 2 years. Second was, that our submarines sneak up or would sneak up on Russian submarines and just communicate with them.
Yeah.
It was just undetectable. And then the third thing, these are that Russia, and I think China as well, Russia is more concerned about controlling their own population than anything NATO can throw at it. That's their biggest fear, is not being able to control the people.
Yes.
Could you just elaborate on those three things?
Yes. Well, okay. So the first thing is that's absolute. The submarine thing, we do that to everyone. We do it to the Brits for fun. It's not, so the United States, it's no secret. The United States has other than the ones that are coming out of Japan, the new ones that are coming out of Japan, the United States has the quietest submarines in the world. And all of these, and Russia and China know this, but our attack, what used to be called the hunter-killer submarines, and just follow these nuclear submarines around from the other countries who have built a nuclear triad like we have. So you have China with their submarines, but Russia and China generally runs diesel submarines, which means you surface, run your generator, you run your diesel power, which make a lot of noise. You're on the surface and you charge up batteries, and then you submerge and have a few days of power on these batteries that operate at dead silence.
Yes.
U.S. uses nuclear submarines, so we don't have to do that. When they would surface, we would detect where they're at. Our submarines would go and find them and just say, "How's it going?" So it was just kind of I know my dad, I grew up in the Air Force. My dad was Air Force, and there was examples of this with F-22s and stuff too in the fighter world. They would just be like, "Hey, how's it going?" and just show up and spook the Russians. But with regards to the controlling population thing, I absolutely believe that the most dangerous thing to the Russians is their own population. And that's the same thing for China. And I 100% believe Xi Jinping believe that to be the case. I don't think they have any illusions that NATO is more dangerous. When you in the military, you talk about the most likely threat and the most dangerous threat. For both Russia and China, the most likely and most dangerous threat are their own population. And in order to deflect from those populations, they have to create a boogeyman.
Yeah.
Something more scary or something more worrisome to think about. And that's the collective West, the NATO's, the US. Or you create a subhuman, they use something from like the Nazi playbook. They create a subhuman species by saying Ukrainians are less than. It's the same thing that the Russians, or not the Russians, but the Nazis actually did, not only for the Jews, but for the Russians.
Maybe we shouldn't use the N-word because TikTok may shut this down.
What's that?
The Nazi word, TikTok may shut down the live. I get censored so much.
I was like, the N-word. I was like, I'm not using the N-word. I got it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you're right.
I was like, the N-word. I was like, I looked in the comments. I'm like, who they? Anyways, we'll just say World War II Germans or something like that.
Yes, that's what I do. I say 1930s Germans. That's what
1930s Germans. And I fully believe that they are needing to control their population. And as we've seen in Russia and somewhat in China, there's been a decline. There's an incoming decline. Now, I'm not saying it's going to collapse. Actually, I think it collapsed for Russia more likely.
Yeah.
But there's going to be and when I say collapse, I don't want people to think that I'm like, they're going to go away. It's like, so the Soviet Union collapsed, and the next day, people still went to work in Russia. People still had dinner. They went to school. When we say collapse, we're not saying it's like the country's gone. If there were to ever be, for whatever reason, a collapse of the Chinese Communist Party within China, it's going to be, for the average Chinese person, they're just going to be like, okay, that sucks. Our economy sucks, but they're still going to exist. China's
There's
still
so much infrastructure there.
Yeah, it's not like it's going away.
Yeah.
So there's sometimes confusion when I say potential economic collapse or potential collapse of the party. It's not the country is being destroyed. It's just, and that's what I think Putin and Xi Jinping, but specifically more Putin at this point, are more afraid of. He would look at what was happening in Belarus with Lukashenko potentially being overthrown. He had to send troops in. He looked at what was happening in Ukraine, and all these countries are like, hey, Russia sucks. And so we want to move into the Western way of thinking, the Western sphere of influence. And that's what Ukraine was moving towards. And it wasn't necessarily that he thought Russia would, but it gives ideas of it. And so what happens is that bleeds into their country. And I think Putin is scared of his people because we've in the last 100, we lived through one, at least I did. I lived through one overthrow when the Berlin Wall fell, and that only happened 80 or so years from the previous one. And so this happens every 50 to 100 years in Russia.
Russia has had 4 constitutions in the past
Yeah.
100 years. Yeah. This
And-
reminds of a great Victor Hugo quote. An army, a powerful army's invasion can be resisted, but not that of an idea whose time has come.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly.
And Russia doesn't want that idea anywhere near the mainland.
Yeah, absolutely.
The thing is, though, it's inevitable. It's like, so the arguments I try to avoid, but sometimes fall into when I'm in person with other people is when they don't necessarily say that Russia's the good guy, but they say NATO has been taking over neighbor after neighbor. And what is Russia supposed to do when they're surrounded by NATO? And my response is always, NATO doesn't annex territory.
Exactly.
Countries request to join NATO. NATO says that sounds nice, but you have to fulfill a lot of criterion for that to happen.
Yep. And it takes years.
It takes years. And so when people say Russia, the Moldova in the 90s or Ossetia in 2008, it's the same thing as no, because Russia sent in their military and killed people who didn't fire one shot. They were invited. The way the intel that Putin was fed about Russian troops being welcomed in Ukraine, that's NATO. NATO gets welcomed into Ukraine and these other countries with no resistance.
Where if even countries that aren't in NATO, such as Georgia, for instance, will request to, this is the cool thing. So Georgia is a really cool example. When the United States went to Afghanistan, Georgia, not being a part of NATO, came to the U.S. and said, hey, we would like to assist. We have institutional knowledge due to proximity of what goes on there. We'd like to help you out. And so for nearly the entirety of the war in Afghanistan, Georgian units would embed with the Marine Corps.
Wow.
And then the Marine Corps would come to the Joint Multinational Readiness Center in Germany, where I was a planner and an observer coach trainer. And they would train with the Marines. The Georgians would train there. And even though they weren't NATO, they knew that if they could, as best they could, tuck themselves under the U.S. umbrella, be helpful to the U.S., be open, and the NATO partners, not just the U.S., but like Germany, France, United Kingdom, et cetera, they could potentially have an in to protect themselves. Unfortunately, that wasn't entirely the case, obviously. But nonetheless, that world is these countries, like you said, they're not just asking, they're begging. They're begging to join NATO because of what they saw with Transnistria, Moldova, when they saw what happened in Georgia, and now what's happening in Ukraine, for sure.
It's really, I wonder I thought I had a good bead on what was going to happen. Let's say in the year 2023, I was like, Russia can't last this much longer, but then China ups all the aid and gives Russia just so much more time to and resources. And now I don't know what to expect. I think like maybe if there is a ceasefire, all Russia's going to do is just regain whatever strength they can. It'll take them, I think, like years to get to the strength that they were, maybe even a decade to get to the strength that they were like in 2022. But I think they'll just try to build up whatever they can in a few years, and they will start to gobble up non-NATO territory.
Absolutely. Yes. The notion of a ceasefire, it plays well to the news. It plays well to the lay person who hears the word ceasefire and goes, oh, that's nice. No one's dying. But the fact of the matter is, since 2014 Crimea, there have been 29 ceasefires. I don't think many people understand that there have been ceasefires. 29 of them. Every single one was broken by Russia. And it didn't matter if it was in the Obama administration or the Trump administration or the Biden administration. President didn't matter. Russia broke those ceasefires, 29 of them in a row that were negotiated by the U.S., by Italy, Turkey, They just, it didn't matter. They were broken. And so the next iteration, let's do the 30th ceasefire and expect it's going to work. I'm skeptical. I just don't think it works. Even if there is a ceasefire, everyone can high five, but I'd give it maybe 2 weeks. And it's off again. And like you said, you're absolutely right. Even let's say a ceasefire is in the cards, it will absolutely be a negative for Ukraine. They would have to give up territory, and a ceasefire means they can't fight to get it back. They don't want to be the ones to break a U.S. whatever brokered ceasefire. Russia doesn't care. They can break it, but that's just going to give Russia time to build up infrastructure in the territory they've taken within their own country. You're absolutely right.
Once in a while, it's been known to happen.
Yeah, flip a coin for me.
You also mentioned something a year ago, and it was really interesting. It was over a year ago, actually, and I couldn't believe you said
people talk about my old stuff.
Oh, dude, I researched a lot of your stuff. Like, you're one of the few people I'm like, let's see, okay, like that I'll actually take time to pay attention to. You should have a podcast.
Everyone says that. I'll be honest, it's a time issue. I mean, we talked about this. I have 4 kids, and so.
Let me tell you, I don't, this is my full-time job. I got 3 kids, one with special needs. So yeah, like I'm just, yeah, I know what you mean. It's so hard to orchestrate the time, like between like research, making a video, and then trying to edit it so it doesn't look like total crap.
Yeah. I just put a phone in front of my face. And that's the thing is, if I'm making a podcast, so I talked with Preston long ago, and he's wicked smart. And so I wanted to be prepared. And I was like, man, just to be prepared for his 1.5 hour long podcast I did, it took days of research. And I was like, if I'm doing my own, I don't want to sound like I don't know what I'm talking about consistently. So it's easy for me to make a 5-minute video chunk.
Yes.
Throw it up on TikTok and YouTube. An 1.5 hours, that's going to eat so much time. I'm not opposed to it. I want to.
But you know what, Chad, like you do this for a living. You pay attention to this. You've been paying attention to this for probably half your life. I think you have so much information that anything really specific you don't have at the top of your head, you still have so much background you could rely on.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
You could just say, oh, actually, I don't know this exact detail, but yeah, you can still say something useful.
And you're probably, I'm sure you're right. I just have this business. So a lot of things that come up in my comments is like, you should run for office. And I have this visceral fear of when I'm representing something, not knowing it, not understanding it. And so I go way deep in the weeds and understand it. And it has given me a broad base of knowledge, but because of that, I haven't overcome that ability to just say, you know what, I have enough to do these types of things. I'll be honest, I probably know more on the foreign policy spectrum than Hegseth does.
Of course you do. Look, have you seen the politicians that make it to the media? They're on shows. They're getting disproven with statistics left and right, and it doesn't even phase them. And it doesn't even phase their favorability.
Yeah, they just say things that we're just like, what? Come on. But yeah, and I'm getting better at it. And I think in the future, there's probably a podcast that works. Hey, that's what we should do. Just do a podcast. Here we go.
I'm working on it. There is a creator who wants me to co-host a podcast. I'm not going to say which one yet, just because, it's still up in the air. But it's definitely cooking. If I do start my own podcast, I would absolutely have you on.
Yeah.
Or co-host or whatever, because like your expertise is so much more than just military stuff. Like you're also a great source of like history and macroeconomics. It's really great stuff.
Yeah, actually, so I guess time to build on, and I'll just quickly close out my history. So I have
go ahead. Because
I feel like we're just like, yeah, you're awesome and I'm awesome. You're awesome. That's awesome. So, but anyways, yeah, I have an MBA from Maryland. I got that because that's what everyone who leaves the military does. We get our MBA for some reason. And then I've got a master's in public policy from Johns Hopkins. And yeah, so I worked in NATO, left. Reason I got out and switched to the reserves was family. I loved the military. I loved it very much. I loved what I was doing. I loved soldiers. But I would look into my son, who at the time was 10 years old, and would go, I'm going to move him for the rest of his life. And when I was able to eligible to retire, he would have been 18 years old. And I was like, missed his whole childhood. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to transition to reserves, settle down somewhere so he can have a life as a child. So that's why I left the military. But Still love it. Still talk to those people. I still work for the federal government. I work for the VA now. That's my normal gig.
What is
but
it?
The Department of Veterans.
Oh, my wife, she helps. She works with the VA too. She's a doctor.
Oh, cool. Yeah, no, I'm a data analyst. Yeah. So I have a economics business background with my MBA. I have my bachelor's degrees in anthropology from New Mexico, and so it's weird. I have this people economics and military warfare policy kind of rounding education and experience. So yeah, so that's me right there. Yeah.
You know, speaking of economics, like something that a lot of people don't really get, but I think it's something that is highly weaponized, is like people say, oh, the US dollar, it's weaponized because it favors some countries, it doesn't favor others. I think so. But remember that post you made about dollar denominated debt? But that, I think, it's our biggest weapon. That right there forced China to be like, okay, we'll do some sanctions. We'll listen to you.
Dollar denominated debt is the ultimate US cheat code on the global stage. And it was a cheat code that the United States didn't even expect to happen. It was not even something that was on the radar after World War II, when basically we took dollar hegemony, and it was not something that was expected. But if you don't mind, I'll just quickly explain it.
Please, that's all I want.
So dollar denominated,
the better.
The dollar denominated, and I'll be 100% honest, this wasn't my idea. And I really want to give the guy credit, and I cannot remember his name, and I will find it and find some way to make up for it. But anyway, so what happens is, the US dollar became the secure reserve currency after World War II. So because it was secure, many countries were like, okay, we want to trade in US dollars because we know the value maintains a certain bandwidth of stability. And so what would happen is you'd have Japan or countries in Europe trading with US dollars because their currencies were still volatile after war. And so when that started happening, people were trading with the US and everything was great. Then Japan was like, I want to trade with Australia. I want to go ahead and trade with Australia. And Australia's like, we don't need Japanese yen. We want dollars. Do you have any? And Japan was like, not really, but here, we'll give you an IOU that says, we will pay you in dollars. So what that does is it generates a dollar denominated debt out of thin air. So the United States didn't control it, doesn't have any say in those types of deals, and it creates dollars out of thin air. So when Japan goes, okay, we'll buy Australian minerals. Here's $30 billion. We don't have it, but here's an IOU. That dollars is just created out of nothing. And so that happens every single day between all the countries, between China. The dollar reserves, I don't know what it is. I haven't looked down it for a couple, or like a good 6 months or so, what the total reserve with status is of the dollar across the world, how many we have.
57% of Forex reserves. That's just dollar reserves, but dollar denominated debt, we're like 80% or something.
Like 3 times. It's 3 times higher. And that right there, the dollar denominated debt there's not enough US dollars on earth to pay all this debt. So it's basically the US deciding, when they decide to print money and say, okay, you, Saudi Arabia, promised to pay China in US dollars. Go ahead and pay it. Here's the dollars. Go ahead.
Yeah.
You, Russia, promised to pay India in US dollars. You're cut off because of what you're doing in Ukraine. And they scrambled. They had to scramble. Yeah. And that's why there's a push from other countries to get out of that system. Yeah. But the fact of the matter is, even if they create their own BRICS currency, those IOUs are still in place. You still owe them dollars or whatever. And so because of that, and again, the US has no control over it. This is like Japan promising China to pay in dollars. The US is like, we can't control That's like me promising my neighbor to pay them in rocks, and the US government say, well, you're not allowed to pay in rocks. Oh yeah, that was a deal between us too. You can't control it.
Yeah.
So that's what happens. And that dollar denominated economy, that subset, is 3 to 4 times larger than the entire US dollar reserve assets across the globe. So
we have about we have 21 or 22 trillion dollars in like the M2 money supply. So anything that's like dollar equivalent. But yeah, the dollar denominated debt is like 80 trillion or
Yeah, it's
it's
crazy.
it's there's yeah,
And
I
that
like
alone secures U.S. power for the rest of my life. I won't see in my lifetime the U.S. lose the peak of global power, I believe.
that's it's interesting when you say that because I feel the same way. I've never, I really do enjoy reading history. I've never read about any other empire or country having this kind of all encompassing control. I know the British, they had the most powerful navy, they had the most land, and they were the world's reserve currency. Great. But even when they were the world's reserve currency in like the 1920s, like 70 to 80% of Forex reserves were still US dollars.
Yeah.
And same thing with the Dutch. They had a similar level of domination. And I guess before that, the Spanish. If you even go to Rome, it's like Rome had these peers. Rome had Persia that they had to contend with. Do you know what I mean? It just,
It's
not
because,
mind how much dominance there is.
and the reason it's different, and I by no means do I think the U.S. is like going to last forever. Every empire falls.
Yep.
It will. The dollar will fall eventually. It's
Yeah.
a matter of time. Like I said, it won't happen in my lifetime, but it's a matter of time. So what I foresee is countries like in the past, like you talk about Great Britain,
Mm.
even going back to Persia,
Mm.
they were empires of force.
Yeah.
We're an empire of choice, meaning people want to be in our sphere of influence. Like we talked about just a second ago with NATO, people beg to be not only under our security umbrella, but under our nuclear umbrella. People beg to be able to trade in our stock exchanges. The top 3 stock exchanges in the entire world are the US's.
Yeah.
So it's like people absolutely try to, other countries are like, please, US, can I have, it's sad, can I have some more? Whereas when you look at even Great Britain, it was, you will do this or these big ships are gonna
Come in there and destabilize
Yeah.
everything. And
Yeah. Now, I'm not saying the US doesn't do that. Now, Middle East, 1990s, 2000s, that was the US. When we wanted to secure oil reserves in the Middle East, we did send ships over and we're like, you'll play by our rules or these are going to do something. But not to the level that Great Britain did or even the Dutch.
that was all Great Britain did. That's all the Dutch did.
Yeah,
They
it
set
was-
up trading posts, but there was so much more force, and there was a Anglicanization
Yep.
that was on its way. And all the U.S. really does is we dominate through. We do have a great military, but it's like our dollar that kind of
Yeah.
infiltrates everything, even like illegal stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, you want to make money, you come to the US. That's what it really boils down to, money at that point. It's if you can't be, there are very few examples of, there's no examples of trillion-dollar companies, but very few examples of billion-dollar companies that aren't operating in the US system. They're either on the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange or something. They all operate in that world, or they go to the 4th largest stock exchange, which is Japan, which again, sphere of influence.
Yeah.
Or they go over to London. Again, it's part of that euro dollar sphere of influence. The only one that kind of sits outside of it is China. And people talk about Chinese currency sits at the same level of the Canadian dollar in influence. So it's not, it's just fascinating because
Just speaking about China, and again, honestly, I know I do criticize a lot of the government policy, but I am in awe at how much they've been able to modernize over the past 60, 70 years. There's a lot to be said. The students are brilliant. The literacy rates are great. Wonderful. The way they've revolutionized a lot of cities. But over half of of all US currency is outside the country. Over half. And it still maintains this value. There's still, like, the US still has such influence over its own currency. China allows maybe 3% or 4% to leave. And that's it. Like they owe money to Russia. And the Chinese are like, oh no, we're keeping it here, but you get to enjoy a trade surplus with us.
Yeah. It's the Chinese, have made enormous strides, and I don't want to discount their strides at all because I don't want to say like they wouldn't have done it without the U.S. A lot of that is correct. A huge U.S. investment, but they have made huge strides. And I am not anti-Chinese by any means. I'm anti-Chinese Communist Party. the fact of the matter is because of the Chinese Communist Party, you're never going to see China actually break out. They peg the yuan or renminbi, whatever you want to call it, to the dollar. It's pegged. It's a pseudo peg. They run it within a band. When the dollar, when it crosses that, when it gets too high or too low relative to the dollar, their internal systems say, stop it, bring it down, and then manipulate it downward. They do this overtly. They talk about it and they do it. Now there's external, or there is other manipulations that are not talked about. That's the stuff that we get pissed about, but they do. That's how powerful the dollar is. The Chinese themselves keep their currency within a band so that trade stays
in their favor.
Yeah. So that's
What felt like here, the funny thing is like the yuan is the overall currency, like something's one yuan, 10 yuan, but isn't the renminbi just like a certain amount of yuan? I don't know why people interchange it. Like, why can't they just pick one?
I've always just called it the yuan. It's wrong. I interchange it, but it's really just half a dozen of one. It's not really, you're really not any kind of differences. For all intents and purposes, just the yuan, whatever, because that's what it's called on Forex markets and stuff where it matters. Yeah. And because of this control over not allowing, because the minute China opens up their system, there's massive capital flow.
See, that's the problem. Like, if they open up their markets, you're going to see a billionaire exodus.
Yeah, exactly. And so they know that. And so they keep it closed, which is exactly why you'll never see a Chinese controlled currency or a Chinese controlled system, whether it's a yuan based currency or a BRICS currency, which, let's be honest, that's China's baby right there. They run that show. That'll never break out because China will never let that system usurp their own Chinese Communist Party system.
Let's think how, I don't know how it's possible, but let's say if China manages to get all the BRICS nations to cooperate and be like, okay, we are going to be trading exclusively in yuan. How would China be able to control, let's say they have all the resources they need. How would they be able to control if like billions of dollars start flowing into Russia, billions of yuan flow into Russia, into Brazil, into South Africa, into India? How would they be able to contain it just within the BRICS network? And
it boils down to what we were just talking about, how the U.S. doesn't actually have control of the U.S. dollar outside of its borders. And that's something that we Americans accept because it has given us immense amount of power and influence. However, the Chinese, they don't want that to be something that gets undermined because China is the Chinese Communist Party. That's it. They're the kings. They don't want anything to undermine that. And the minute they deregulate the yuan or whatever BRICS currency, and let's say Brazil starts determining value of things in that BRICS currency, Chinese Communist Party is not going to allow that to happen. So what you're saying is right. There's not a way to control that. And that's why I just don't think they're going to allow it to get to that level.
But even if, let's say they're doing it, and let's say, because if that happens, the demand for the yuan would go up, right? And then they're like, oh, wow, our yuan is getting too expensive.
Yeah.
I mean, our imports are going to get pricey. Well, but they're sitting on like $1 trillion of just dollars. Can't they just sell more yuan for dollars to keep the money?
That's the thing. That's what they would have to do is it's a rock and a hard place situation.
Yeah.
It's either they drive the price of the yuan down so that their exports are cheaper. Or they raise it up to try to drive the dollar down, but that makes things more expensive or cheaper on the export import. And the problem is in China's bubble, they'll always operate. They say these numbers in a bubble of BRICS or whatever, and they go, China does this. But what they don't do is realize that the United States and Europe still exist on Earth. And so what happens is they will say within the BRICS system, we've done this, and everyone's okay, great. So you create a system where you make payments in oil to Saudi Arabia using yuan or whatever. And but you know what? Saudi Arabia still wants dollars so they can buy cool stuff from the United States
and treasury bonds.
And so these little side projects is what I like to call them, of trying to create currencies they're just not going to be, either they're going to be heavily managed or they're going to be completely open. And when they're heavily managed, no one's going to buy into it because no one wants to buy into a system that some person's, okay, this is the value today, because then it's not a free market system. And you're not going to, you're at the whims of a person, and the Chinese Communist Party is never going to want to go, okay, we'll open the value up, because then it hurts them. They have capital flight. They have, frankly, it'll probably cause everyone to just leave the yuan at that point because of the volatility that we're seeing in our economy right now. But yeah, like I said, there's no way to,
It's interesting.
Through the rock and a hard place. There's not much they can do.
I agree. And the funny thing is, you just mentioned you either heavily manage trade or you allow free trade to happen. And I think obviously you allow free trade to happen. And I think the tariffs are an impediment to that. Like the tariffs that may come. It's funny because a lot of people think, oh yeah, Gio Poster is like a hardcore Democrat or anything. I'm really not. I'm actually an independent because I do believe in free trade and I do believe in like lighter regulations. And it's funny to people on the left. I'm like, they're like, they're Republican, conservative.
I get that.
But to the conservative, they're like,
Republicans.
you're breathing hard Obama water. I'm like, oh, wow. But the thing is, that's what we need. So if we increase tariffs to like our main trading partners, all that's it's too much energy and effort put into watching over trade, which is something that just does very well without anyone watching it. So why would we even devote energy?
I'll put it out. I am 100% against tariffs to places like Canada and Mexico. Those make no sense.
Yes.
We're so integrated between that three band of countries, the Mexico, US, Canada, that tariffs just make no sense. We have enough of a good relationship, or at least we had enough of a good relationship between those three countries that we can figure out ways. And I think the best route is the free trade route. And the reason I think that is because it'll suck. The US is a capital vacuum. And so what happens is we can pivot our manufacturing to Russia. We can pivot our manufacturing to Mexico and also grab our energy from Canada. So we will have, and so just leave that alone.
Yeah.
Now, I will say on the tariff front with regard to China, I don't like broad. I don't tariff everything blam like a sledgehammer. I do think there are some punishments that we need to inflict on China.
Yes.
Because of IP theft, because
the laser guided tariffs.
It hit something very pointed, specific that hurts them. And I made a video about this where it was like the one-way decoupling instead of a full decoupling, because I think that makes China more dangerous. It turns them into a bigger, more dangerous North Korea. But I think if we're going to tariff people in, or not people, but things, organizations, whatever, products out of China, it needs to be laser focused. But just broadly saying flat out 25 or 50% tariff on China, that makes no sense, because then it's almost like, it's like when you ground your son or your kid for a week and then they do something else and you're like, all right, you're grounded a month. And they're at that point that they're just like, I don't see the difference at this point.
Yes.
And additional grounding. So I'm gonna just keep doing bad things. And the punishment is meaningless at this point. So
and that cripples our manufacturing, because it's not like we're importing the finished product from China. Like our manufacturing industry uses components from China. So why would we pass that on to the American manufacturer, to the people working in factories who may have to lose their jobs?
And you're right. I think there is it takes a lot more work, and it doesn't look as sexy on the news channel to say, okay, I used the trade representative to go in and we honed in on specifically this type of processor that comes out of China and we use in this widget here.
Yeah.
Now going to tariff that, it's going to hurt China way more than it hurts us because we can alternatively source it from Singapore or something. We don't, for some reason, that's not, and I'm hoping that at the trade level, that is happening. I don't work in treasury. I don't work in trade. So I'm hoping that is happening. But what we see on the news is the sledgehammer, 25%. And because things like that have impacts on markets. And whether it doesn't matter if it's Musk, Trump, Biden, any of these Bezos, massively influential people, when they say things, markets react. And so that's it's going to cause problems.
You probably know this already, but like we effectively tariffed Japanese motorcycles in the 80s and it worked. It brought up Harley Davidson.
Yeah.
But then when we tried to, what did we do? We did a tariff. Did we do a tariff on Chinese steel or Japanese steel? I think it was,
It was Japanese steel.
and that hurt us. Yeah, that hurt us because steel went into everything.
Yeah. And it's like when that deal, when Japan was trying to buy that steel company, I'm like, let it happen. Yeah. Man, he was a friend of ours and it's just, I have a Nissan Frontier.
Oh yeah. Is that the car the CIA pays you to spread
The CIA by filthy rich CIA. Yeah. I bought a Nissan Frontier last year. And I love that truck. It was built in North Carolina or something like that. Which is funny because my dad's Ram was built in Mexico. The thing is, these are countries, let's not punish the countries that are overtly our friends. Japan, Mexico, Canada, much of the European Union. Obviously, we have some heartburn with countries like Hungary and Turkey and stuff, but let's just work together because we're all reasonable. We don't need to just bludgeon people into compliance because the U.S. has the power to do so.
Yeah, I agree. It's not subtle. Subtle power goes a longer way than just do this because we say so.
Yeah, exactly. Soft power.
Speaking of steel, I made a post about this, about the deal that was blocked. Is it made me think the U.S. used to be like the biggest steel producer in the world under Carnegie. And the value of Carnegie's U.S. steel, if it were put in today's dollars, because Carnegie U.S. steel was about 2 to 4% of the U.S.'s GDP.
Yeah.
Holy freaking cow.
Yeah.
That power. And I think they controlled like 70% of the steel production in America, and America controlled 30% of the steel production in the world at that time. What kind of that's no other company has really, except for maybe Rockefeller with oil, but no one else really, no one entity had that much power over the US and the world market in its history. And like people, I think we should, not you and I, but that should just be a known thing. Like what Carnegie was.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was a fact.
We've weirdly gone away from limiting the power of massive companies. And the last time we really saw, so I'll give you 2 examples. The last time we saw a massive company have the brakes pumped on them was Microsoft.
Yep.
When they were trying to do that whole proprietary web browser thing. And the US government came in and said, nah, you can't do that. You can't own the entire internet. And so that was really the last time that I remember of the government actually doing their job and saying, you can't control everything.
Yeah.
More recently in my own personal life, so the grocery chain Albertsons is headquartered here in Boise. It's a massive grocery chain. Kroger, Fred Meyer, they were trying to buy Albertsons. The U.S. government came in and said, nope, that would be another monopoly. So actually, it has happened. This was just last year that they came in and said no to that deal because it would be, which is interesting because they still wouldn't even be the largest grocer. Walmart is.
Well, what the hell? Why not stop the social media monopolies?
That's what I'm saying is it's like here's the thing. Albertsons doesn't have a voice. It can't speak to the people. Yeah, it would have impacted us here in Boise because the headquarters is here. But when you own the means of communication, that's power there. So that's what's happening is when Musk has Twitter X or Zuckerberg pivoted away from his worldviews of where he's now more in that right-leaning worldview. Yeah. Those types of things are because they're the means of communication. Let's be honest. They've usurped. Yeah.
It's like William Randolph Hearst. It reminds me of that. And I don't know, was he ever really taken down or did he just die?
That's a question for lay people in the government. Did he just die? Oh,
it's because here's the thing. I think that if a breakup of the social media monopolies were possible, it might be Trump who could do it just because he has the people behind him. It doesn't matter. Every social media platform could bash him left and right. If Trump said, hey, we have to really deal with Facebook controlling too much, it would work. And then once he took out Facebook, he could say, hey, you have a little too much power.
Yeah. And what's interesting is I'm not a Trump fan. Obviously, I've made that clear several times in my videos, but the we've seen just today, I was reading an article where Trump's chief of staff has basically kicked Musk out
Yep.
of the sphere
Yep.
of things.
I just posted that yesterday.
Yeah. And then we see this TikTok thing where potentially Oracle might be
Yeah.
TikTok. I don't know what that looks like, frankly. But so you might be right. You might be seeing now, is it for his own purposes? I don't know. But you might be seeing this pseudo kind of monopoly busting effort. But at the end, does it just consolidate into one then? Because I'll be honest, what people don't look at is YouTube. They don't look at Google YouTube because it's relatively innocuous. But when you actually go on television viewers, I just saw this from Scott Galloway's podcast. I love his books and stuff.
He's great. He's brilliant.
Yeah. And so he showed us a statistic that showed number of or the apps most watched on actual TV, like your TV in your living room. Number one was Netflix. Number two was YouTube. YouTube is the number two most watched app, meaning they have, at least in TV watching, mammoth influence, and no one's talking about them. And maybe it's because they are somewhat open. Although I'll be honest, I have an account that it was banned completely because I talked about Wagner Group out of Russia, and they shut me down trying to rebuild a channel. But
You had wait, how many followers did you have?
it was early on. I only had 5,200, so it wasn't huge as well as I do. YouTube is really hard to build subscribers on.
That's why we should collab though on it. That's why like this whole thing is going to go on YouTube.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to tag you and all that stuff. And
Did you see Preston? He put it on. I don't know if you follow him on Twitter.
you saw that. I was like,
Holy yeah. That dude makes $150,000 a year on YouTube.
Like, what do I have
Not
to
like
do?
700,000 followers, but still, that's crazy.
yeah, it's okay. Well, like, tell me what to do. What bikini do I wear? High heels? What do you on YouTube?
Yeah, my new channel on YouTube just crossed over 5,000. And the only reason I got that many was because I was like hammering it because of the TikTok ban. But
I got almost 10,000 now and I got 9,780. So I'll plug you. Like, I'll just
absolutely, I would love that.
push them my way, I'll push them your way. Because
Absolutely. I saw Preston. I'm like, when I get a paycheck from TikTok and it's $600, I'm like, hooray. He's over here making like freaking $200,000 across all his social media.
making support your family platform. I spoke with him a couple days ago and I was like, okay, I really want to get the YouTube thing going. And he said two things. He told me about the TV. So I'm going to get a camera. I'm going to get one of these portable cameras that, it does landscape because apparently that's really good for TV. The second,
That's what I have right next to what I'm on. This right here does my landscape stuff.
can you send me the link for what kind of camera it is? Because it was the small and portable one. And I'm looking to not spend $1,000.
No, the one I use is just because it's a 4K Logitech Brio webcam for like, that'll work for TV. But if you want to be mobile, I mean, I just use a Canon camera, frankly, for my mobiles. Like when I went to Greece for NATO stuff, I used the Canon camera for all my.
Oh, wait, I wanted to say the last thing he told me, because this is important, thumbnails. Make thumbnails for your YouTubes.
I started doing that. Putting like I feel corny because you take a picture of yourself and you're like, or something like that. But yeah, that's what I started doing. And it has increased.
I got a cheat code. My cheat code was I just look at one of my videos where I'm talking. I pause it where I don't look like a total idiot. Because a lot of my pauses are, so there are some where I actually look okay. I pause it and then I put it on Canva and I magic erase all the words.
Yeah.
And then I do background remover and I just put that on the background. So I don't have to take any thirst trap photos of myself.
Yeah. So he's the guru. He's the master. We need to learn from him.
Yeah, sure. All right. So I got to wrap up in a minute because I figure we did this for a good hour. I think this is really good content.
No, I'll definitely do it again for sure.
Oh, Mount Denver. Is there anything you want to tell the viewers here for the people who are going to be watching this down the months or the years? What message do you want to send to people?
Oh man, there's so many. I guess one of the biggest questions I always get from my comments, is it all going to come to an end? Is the party over for the world because of what Russia's doing? Because there's now supposedly the Cold War 2.0 between the United States and China. And I want to say, no, I still don't think Russia, yes, is a problem that we will have to deal with. But the Cold War mentality between the United States and China is different. There's a lot of differences between what we saw between the US and the Soviet Union. Sure, there's some similarities, like there's an ideological rivalry, a pseudo arms race. We're trying to have a strategic containment, et cetera. But with regard to the total picture, I don't think it's as scary. We're not going to have missile crises with China and such because of the economic ties. We are deeply tied together. Unlike the US and the USR were not tied together whatsoever. We have collaboration, even though it doesn't seem like it, we actually do collaborate on tech and trade and innovation and things like that. And there's just a lot of interconnected nature between the two. We still send our people there to have, they send their people to come to our universities. We send our people to work there. There's a lot of interdependence and such. And that alone makes me hopeful that there's always going to be a dialogue and we're going to work together despite the fact that we do have ideological differences and they are our rival, but they aren't our enemy.
I agree.
In Russia, I think Russia's influence is waning. I think Russia is that everyone talks about what a dying power does is it's dying. I don't think China's dying as fast or as terribly as a lot of people will say they are. They are going to struggle. Their demographics are going to make them struggle, but they aren't going to die. Russia is making decisions on top of
Dying.
dying that are making things worse.
Yep.
But their influence on the world is less than France. And when it comes to economics, when it comes to military, we've seen they're not even the most powerful military in Europe at this point. And so I'm hopeful that there will be dialogues. I don't know what the future of the Trump administration makes of that. I can tell you from experience, having worked in the Obama and then Trump administrations, that often what is said on the campaign trail, once you get in the seat, the world changes and you have to be more realistic in what you're doing. And don't judge the entirety of what we might see for the whole presidency on what he's doing to please campaign folks and his base in the first 2 weeks to 100 days. So I'm hopeful. I'm still optimistic that the U.S. is going to be a great nation, and we will work together with China to hopefully one day contain Russia's their ambitions and such. I guess that's what I was with. So
Thank you, Ted. This was great. This was like, because I feel like this discussion was so jam-packed with information that covered so many different sectors.
yeah, go Chiefs for everyone that hates me, but
You're cheap.